I never imagined that moving to Oakridge Estates would lead to a standoff with a fake homeowners association that nearly cost us thousands of dollars and our sanity. But that's exactly what happened 6 months after my wife Rachel and I settled into what we thought was our dream home. It was a crisp October morning when the first knock came at our door. I was in the middle of my second cup of coffee, still groggy from a late night of coding for a project deadline. Rachel had already left for her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse practitioner. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a middle-aged woman with unnaturally blonde hair styled in what could only be described as an architectural feat. Her lips were pursed in disapproval, and she wore a navy blazer with a name tag that read Patricia Walters, Oakridge HOA Enforcement. "Good morning," she said, though there was nothing good about her tone. "I'm Patricia from the Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association. We've received multiple complaints about violations on your property." I blinked, trying to process this information. "I'm sorry, what violations?" Patricia pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through a document with an air of authority. "Let's see. Improper yard maintenance, unauthorized exterior paint color, unapproved fence installation," and she looked up with narrowed eyes. "An unauthorized vehicle in the driveway. The total comes to $1,750 in fines, which are due within 30 days. My mind was racing. Rachel and I had specifically chosen this neighborhood in suburban Denver because it didn't have an HOA. We'd done our research, examined the property records, and confirmed with our real estate agent, Grant Mitchell. Freedom from arbitrary rules had been a major selling point for us. "There must be some mistake," I said. "This neighborhood doesn't have an HOA." Patricia's smile tightened. "Mr. Q, the Oakridge Estates HOA has been established for over 3 years now. All homeowners are automatically enrolled upon purchase of property within our boundaries. The information was in your closing documents. This was absolutely false. I would have remembered and rejected any mention of an HOA in our paperwork. I'd like to see documentation of this HOA's legal formation and our enrollment," I said, trying to remain calm. "Of course," Patricia responded, handing me a professional-looking folder. "Here's a copy of the violation notice, the HOA bylaws, and payment instructions. We expect prompt resolution of these issues." I took the folder, still skeptical. "I'll need to discuss this with my wife and review our closing documents." "That's fine," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But remember, the clock is ticking on those fines, and they increase by 10% every 2 weeks. They remain unpaid." After she left, I immediately called Rachel, who was equally bewildered. We had specifically avoided HOA neighborhoods, and nothing in our closing paperwork mentioned one. Something didn't add up. That evening, Rachel and I pored over our mortgage documents and property records. As I suspected, there was no mention of any homeowners association. The folder Patricia had given me contained official-looking documents, but something felt off about them. The logo seemed generic, and the bylaws were vague at best. "We should ask the neighbors," Rachel suggested, running her fingers through her auburn hair, a habit when she was thinking. "If there's really an HOA, they'd know about it too." The next morning, I walked across the street to talk with our neighbor, Frank Thompson, a retired postal worker who'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. "HOA? No, son. Oakridge has never had one," Frank said, leaning on his garden rake. "That's why most of us moved here in the first place." "Who's asking about an HOA?" I explained about Patricia's visit and the supposed violations. Frank's weathered face creased with concern. "That doesn't sound right at all. You should talk to Emily Chen down the block. She's lived here longer than almost anyone, about 25 years now. If anyone would know about an HOA forming, it would be her." Emily's response was even more definitive. "There is absolutely no HOA in Oakridge Estates," she said firmly. "Never has been. We've had developers try to establish one over the years, but the neighborhood has always voted against it. By the end of the day, I'd spoken with 5 long-time residents, and they all confirmed the same thing. Oakridge Estates had no homeowners association. The next morning, I called the county recorder's office and asked about any HOA registration for our neighborhood. The clerk confirmed what the neighbors had said: no HOA was registered for Oakridge Estates. "This is a scam," Rachel said that evening as we sat at our kitchen table. "They're trying to extort money from us." But why us? Why now? I wondered. Maybe because we're new to the neighborhood, they might think we wouldn't question it. We decided to ignore the notice, assuming Patricia would move on to other targets when we didn't pay. We were wrong. 3 days later, another knock came at the door. This time I was prepared. I opened it to find Patricia standing there with a man in a polo shirt who introduced himself as Douglas Reed, the HOA board president. "Mr. Q, we're concerned about your lack of response to the violation notice," Douglas said. "The fines are now up to $1,925 with late fees." I smiled politely. "I've confirmed with the county recorder's office that there is no registered HOA for Oakridge Estates. I've also spoken with multiple neighbors who have lived here for decades, and they all confirm the same thing. So unless you can provide legitimate documentation proving the legal existence of this HOA, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." Patricia's face flushed, but Douglas maintained his composure. "There seems to be some confusion. The HOA was recently established and may not be reflected in all records yet. We'll return with the proper documentation." They left without further argument, which only confirmed my suspicions. The next day, I received an email from Oakridge HOA at Mailcom with attachments purporting to be official documentation of the HOA's formation. The documents looked professional but lacked any official seals or filing numbers. The email threatened legal action if we didn't pay the now $2,000 in fines. That's when I decided to take the matter more seriously. I called the local police department's non-emergency line to report what I suspected was a scam. Officer James Rodriguez took my call and listened carefully to my story. "This actually isn't the first report we've received about this," he said. "A couple in Pinewood Heights, about 15 minutes from you, reported something similar last month. Would you be willing to file a formal report?" I agreed, and Officer Rodriguez came to our house that afternoon. He examined the documents Patricia had provided and took copies of the email. "These look professionally done, but there are inconsistencies," he noted. "The contact address listed for the HOA is a P.O. box, and the phone number goes to a voicemail that just says Oakridge office. I'm going to forward this to our fraud division." A week passed with no word from the HOA, and I hoped they'd moved on. Then came a certified letter threatening legal action and a lien on our home if we didn't pay the fines, which had now mysteriously grown to $2,500. The letter was signed by Patricia Walters, enforcement officer, and included a return address for a law firm I'd never heard of. Rachel was getting increasingly anxious. What if they actually try to put a lien on our house? Can they do that? "Not without legal authority," I assured her, "but let's talk to a real lawyer to be safe." We made an appointment with Olivia Martinez, a real estate attorney recommended by a colleague. After reviewing our situation, she was unequivocal. "This is absolutely a scam," Olivia said. "HOAs must be properly registered with the state and county. They can't retroactively include properties without owner consent, and they certainly can't impose fines without due process as outlined in legitimate bylaws." She advised us to file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office and the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division. Also, keep detailed records of all interactions with these people. If they come to your property again, record the conversation if possible, but let them know you're recording. We followed her advice and filed complaints that same day. I also purchased a video doorbell to capture any future visits from our fake HOA enforcers. 2 days later, Patricia returned, this time with a different man who introduced himself as Mike Reynolds, their legal counsel. I activated the recording function on my phone and informed them they were being recorded. "We understand you've been reluctant to address the violations on your property," Mike said, ignoring my notification about the recording. "We're here to offer you a one-time settlement opportunity. If you pay $1,500 today, we'll waive the additional fees and penalties." "That's very generous," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But before we discuss any payment, I need to see the legal documentation showing the formation of this HOA, including the state filing number and the recorded covenants that would give you authority over my property." Mike shifted uncomfortably. "Those documents are available at our office. I can have them sent to you." "Actually, I've already checked with the county recorder's office and the Secretary of State. There is no registered HOA for Oakridge Estates. What you're doing appears to be fraudulent, and I've filed reports with the police and the district attorney's office." Patricia's face turned pale and Mike quickly attempted to backpedal. "There must be some misunderstanding. We'll look into this and get back to you." They hurried back to their car, a blue sedan with no markings or logos. I noticed Rachel watching from the living room window, her face a mixture of anxiety and relief. "That was amazing," she said after I closed the door. "Do you think they'll leave us alone now?" "I hope so, but somehow I doubt it. They seem too organized to give up that easily." I forwarded the recording to Officer Rodriguez, who called back that evening. "This is great evidence," he said. "Our fraud unit is investigating several similar complaints now. They're building a case, but it takes time." We didn't hear from the fake HOA for nearly 2 weeks, and I began to hope they had indeed given up. Then came the escalation that would ultimately lead to their downfall. Rachel was home alone on a Thursday afternoon. She'd taken a rare day off to recover from a particularly grueling week at the hospital. I was at a client meeting across town when my phone buzzed with a text from her. "They're back. 3 of them this time. They're taking pictures of our house." I immediately called her. "Don't engage with them," I said. "Just stay inside and call Officer Rodriguez." "They're putting something on our door," she said, her voice tense. "One of them is in a uniform that looks like a sheriff's deputy, but something seems off about it." My stomach dropped. "Rachel, that's impersonating an officer. Call 911 right now." I ended the call and immediately headed home, my heart racing. 15 minutes into my drive, Rachel called back. "The police are here," she said, sounding calmer. The fake HOA people tried to flee, but a patrol car caught them at the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived home 20 minutes later, our driveway was blocked by 2 police cruisers. Officer Rodriguez was in our living room, taking Rachel's statement while another officer stood in the doorway. "Your wife did exactly the right thing," Rodriguez told me as I rushed in. "The 3 individuals were attempting to post what appeared to be an official foreclosure notice on your door. One was wearing a costume that resembled a sheriff's uniform." "Foreclosure? They can't do that," I exclaimed. "Of course not," Rodriguez agreed. "But they've apparently been successful with this scam in other neighborhoods. They typically target new homeowners who might not know the area well or immigrants who might be intimidated by official-looking documents." The notice they had tried to post claimed that our home would be auctioned in 30 days due to unpaid HOA dues and fines. It directed payments to be sent to a P.O. box or made via a website that required banking information. "We've arrested all 3 individuals," Rodriguez continued. Patricia Walters, whose real name is Karen Davidson, has a record of similar schemes in other states. The man in the fake uniform is her husband, Robert Davidson. The 3rd individual was identified as Thomas Wright, who has outstanding warrants in Nevada for fraud. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by anger. How many people have they scammed? We're still determining that. Based on financial records seized from their vehicle, it appears they've been operating this fake HOA scheme in at least 3 neighborhoods in the Denver area for about 8 months. They've collected an estimated $95,000 so far. The investigation revealed that Karen and her accomplices had been systematically targeting newer residents in neighborhoods without HOAs. They would research property records to identify recent home purchases, then approach those homeowners with fake violation notices. If a homeowner paid, they would continue to invent new violations. If questioned, they would move on to easier targets. Their operation was sophisticated. They had created fake websites, printed professional-looking documents, and even purchased uniforms and vehicle magnets to appear legitimate. They had targeted at least 47 homeowners, and 22 had paid some amount of money, ranging from $500 to over $8,000. In the days that followed, Detective Sarah Maxwell from the Financial Crimes Unit interviewed Rachel and me multiple times. We learned that Karen and Robert Davidson had run similar schemes in Arizona and Nevada before moving to Colorado. They typically operated until complaints mounted, then moved to a new state. The impersonation of a law enforcement officer is what will really cost them, Detective Maxwell explained during one interview. That elevates this from simple fraud to a much more serious crime. The district attorney decided to pursue multiple charges: fraud, extortion, impersonating a law enforcement officer, criminal conspiracy, and identity theft, for creating the fake HOA entity. The Davidsons and Wright remained in custody, unable to post the $250,000 bail set for each of them. A month after their arrest, I received a call from the district attorney's office. The prosecutor, Leonard Torres, wanted to discuss our case. Mr. Q, the defendants are considering a plea deal, Torres explained. They would plead guilty to multiple counts of fraud and the impersonation charge in exchange for a slightly reduced sentence. They would also be required to make full restitution to all victims. Before I agree to any deal, I wanted to get your thoughts. I discussed it with Rachel that evening. While part of me wanted them to face maximum penalties, we also recognized that a plea deal would spare us and other victims from having to testify at a trial. I think we should support the plea deal if it includes full restitution and significant jail time, Rachel said. It would bring closure more quickly. I called Torres the next morning to express our support for a reasonable plea agreement, but we'd like them to face serious consequences, I added. This wasn't just about money, they caused real stress and fear. I understand, Torres assured me. I'm pushing for a minimum of 5 years for the Davidsons and 3 for Wright, who was less involved. The restitution would be court-ordered and supervised. 3 weeks later, Karen and Robert Davidson pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts. Karen received 6 years in state prison, while Robert received 5. Thomas Wright, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received 3 years. All 3 were ordered to pay full restitution to their victims. In an unexpected twist, the investigation into the fake HOA scam uncovered a larger network of fraud operations. The Davidsons had connections to similar schemes in 5 other states, leading to a multi-state task force being formed to address what appeared to be an emerging trend of fake HOA scams targeting homeowners. As the case concluded, our neighborhood organized a community meeting to discuss what had happened and how to prevent similar schemes in the future. Over 60 residents gathered in the local community center, many of whom had been approached by the fake HOA but had not reported it. The best protection is community awareness, Officer Rodriguez told the group. Know your neighbors, verify official-looking documents with local government offices, and report suspicious activity immediately. The meeting evolved into a discussion about whether Oakridge Estates should consider forming a legitimate HOA to protect property values and prevent future scams. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I moved here specifically to avoid HOAs, said Emily Chen, expressing what many felt. I don't want to create one just because some criminals pretended to be one. In the end, the neighborhood voted overwhelmingly against forming an HOA, but did establish a voluntary neighborhood watch program, and an email list for sharing information about potential scams or suspicious activities. As for Rachel and me, the experience left us more vigilant but also more connected to our community. We had gotten to know most of our neighbors through the ordeal, and those relationships proved to be the silver lining of the whole experience. 6 months after the arrests, we received a restitution check for $500, the amount we had calculated as the value of our time spent dealing with the fake HOA. It wasn't much, but it represented justice served. The fake HOA scam also prompted the Colorado legislature to pass a new law requiring all homeowners associations to register with the state and maintain a publicly searchable database of legitimate HOAs. The law, informally known as the Davidson Act, included enhanced penalties for impersonating HOA officials. 1 year to the day after Patricia's first knock on our door, Rachel and I hosted a block party for our neighbors. What had begun as a frightening encounter with fraudsters had transformed into a stronger, more vigilant community. As we shared stories over barbecue and drinks, Frank Thompson raised his glass in a toast. "To good neighbors and bad scammers who failed," he said with a grin. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. In the strangest of ways, Karen Davidson and her fake HOA had given us something real and valuable, a neighborhood that looked out for one another. "You know what's funny?" Rachel said to me as we cleaned up after the party. "If they had just asked for a smaller amount that first time, like $100 or $200, we might have just paid it to avoid the hassle." "Their greed was their downfall," I agreed. "They got too ambitious." "Well, I'm glad they did," she said. "Otherwise, they might still be out there, scamming people who can't afford to lose that money." I nodded, thinking about some of the other victims we'd met during the case: elderly residents living on fixed incomes, a young couple with a newborn who had paid over $3,000 before realizing it was a scam, an immigrant family who had been too intimidated to question the fake authority figures. The experience had been a harsh reminder that not all threats come from obvious places. Sometimes they arrive in blazers with clipboards and official-looking documents, exploiting the trust people place in established systems. As life returned to normal, Rachel and I found ourselves becoming unofficial advisors to friends and colleagues about HOA issues. We had learned more about homeowners associations and property law than we ever wanted to know. "You should write about this," my friend Gregory suggested during a poker night at our house. "It could help other people avoid similar scams." I considered it, and with Rachel's encouragement, I started a blog documenting our experience and providing resources for homeowners to verify legitimate HOAs and spot potential scams. To my surprise, the blog gained traction quickly, with thousands of visitors within the first month. Local news stations picked up our story, and I was invited to speak at community centers and retirement communities about recognizing and avoiding real estate scams. Rachel sometimes joined me, offering her perspective on the emotional impact of being targeted. "The hardest part wasn't the money they were demanding," she would tell audiences. "It was the feeling of violation that someone could come to our home, a place where we should feel safe, and threaten us with impunity. That's what kept me up at night." The media coverage led to something unexpected: more victims coming forward. The Davidsons' operation had been more extensive than initially thought. Additional charges were filed based on new victim statements, extending their sentences by several years. Detective Maxwell called me about 8 months after the arrests with an update. "We've identified over 100 victims across 3 states," she said. "The total fraud amount is now estimated at over $300,000. Some victims lost their homes due to legitimate foreclosures after spending their mortgage payments on fake HOA fees. The scale of the scheme was staggering, as was its impact on vulnerable homeowners." The case eventually attracted federal attention, with the FBI joining the investigation to explore connections to organized crime networks specializing in real estate fraud. 2 years after our encounter with Karen Davidson, I received an unexpected letter from Karen herself. Prison mail with its distinctive markings was unmistakable. I hesitated to open it, unsure what she could possibly want to say. Rachel was equally apprehensive. "You don't have to read it," she said. "You don't owe her anything." But curiosity won out. The letter was brief and surprisingly contrite. "Mr. Q, I am writing to apologize for the distress I caused you and your wife. While taking a rehabilitation program here, I've been encouraged to make amends where possible. I know an apology doesn't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I recognize the harm I caused. I also want to thank you in a way. If you hadn't stood up to me, I would still be out there hurting people. Sometimes getting caught is the best thing that can happen to a person. Sincerely, Karen Davidson." I showed the letter to Rachel, who read it with a skeptical expression. "Do you think she means it?" she asked. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "It could be genuine remorse, or it could be part of an effort to improve her standing for a parole hearing. Either way, it doesn't really matter to me." I decided not to respond to the letter. Whether Karen's apology was sincere or calculated didn't change what had happened or the consequences she rightfully faced. As the 3rd anniversary of the fake HOA incident approached, life had fully returned to normal. Rachel had been promoted to department supervisor at the hospital, and my software development business was thriving. We had even started discussing the possibility of children, a step we had postponed during the uncertainty of the fraud case and its aftermath. The case against the Davidsons and their network had expanded significantly. What began as a local fraud investigation had uncovered a multi-state criminal enterprise involving identity theft, mortgage fraud, and money laundering. Federal prosecutors had taken over the case, bringing RICO charges against 12 individuals connected to the scheme. Karen and Robert Davidson would likely spend most of their remaining productive years in federal prison. Thomas Wright, who had continued to cooperate with authorities, was serving as a key witness in the federal case. The legacy of their scheme, however, extended beyond criminal prosecutions. The Davidson Act in Colorado had inspired similar legislation in neighboring states, creating stronger regulations for homeowners associations and better protections for property owners. Our blog had evolved into a nonprofit organization that advocated for homeowner rights and educated communities about real estate fraud. One sunny Saturday, almost exactly 3 years after our first encounter with the fake HOA, I was mowing our front lawn when a car slowed in front of our house. For a brief moment, old anxieties surfaced. Then I recognized Officer Rodriguez, now Sergeant Rodriguez, waving from the driver's seat. He pulled into our driveway and stepped out with a smile. "Thought you might want to know," he said after we exchanged greetings. The federal trial concluded yesterday, guilty verdicts across the board. The ringleaders are looking at 15 to 20 years. "That's great news," I said, genuinely relieved. "Thanks for letting us know in person." "Well, it started here," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward our house. "If you and your wife hadn't stood your ground and gathered evidence, who knows how long they would have continued or how many more people would have been victimized." After he left, I went inside to tell Rachel the news. She was in the kitchen, preparing lunch for us and the Thompsons, who were coming over to discuss the neighborhood watch schedule. "So it's really over," she said, putting down the knife she'd been using to slice tomatoes. "Finally," I nodded. 15 to 20 years for the ringleaders. Rodriguez said our case was the cornerstone of the whole investigation. Rachel smiled, a full, relieved smile I hadn't seen in a long time when discussing this topic. "I'm glad we fought back," she said. "I'm glad we didn't just pay to make them go away." "Me too," I agreed. Although sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had just ignored that first knock at the door. Then they would have moved on to someone else, someone who might not have questioned them or had the resources to fight back, Rachel pointed out. Sometimes you have to open the door and face the problem. The doorbell rang. Frank and Martha Thompson arriving for lunch, right on time. As I went to answer it, I reflected on Rachel's words. Sometimes you do have to open the door and face the problem, even when it arrives in the form of a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and an air of unearned authority. The fake HOA had tried to use our desire for peace and security against us, counting on our willingness to pay rather than fight. They had underestimated not just our determination, but the strength of our community. As I welcomed the Thompsons into our home, I felt a deep appreciation for the neighborhood. We had chosen a place without an HOA, but with something much more valuable. Neighbors who looked out for one another, not because of rules and regulations, but because it was the right thing to do. That evening, as Rachel and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset, she took my hand. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe it's time to take down the blog, move on completely." I considered her suggestion. The blog had served its purpose, helping countless homeowners identify and avoid similar scams. The legislative changes it had helped inspire were firmly in place. Perhaps it was time to close that chapter. "You're right," I said after a moment. "It's time to put the fake HOA behind us for good." "Not completely behind us," Rachel corrected gently. "We learned too much to forget it entirely, but maybe it doesn't need to be such an active part of our lives anymore." I nodded, understanding what she meant. The experience had changed us, made us more vigilant, more engaged with our community, more aware of how systems can be manipulated. Those were lessons worth keeping, even as we moved beyond the specific incident that taught them. The next day, I posted a final entry on the blog, thanking readers for their support and engagement, sharing the news of the federal convictions, and providing resources for those who needed ongoing information about HOA fraud. Within hours, the post had received hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories and expressing gratitude for the awareness the blog had created. Some were former victims of the Davidson scheme. Others had avoided similar scams because of what they'd learned from our experience. One comment in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman named Maria in Arizona. 3 years ago, a woman calling herself Patricia came to my door with HOA violation notices. "Because of your blog, I knew to ask for verification and to check with my county recorder." When she couldn't provide legitimate documentation, I called the police. She was arrested trying the same scam in another neighborhood 2 weeks later. "Thank you for speaking out. You protected my family from losing money we couldn't afford to lose." I showed the comment to Rachel when she got home from work. "This is why it mattered," I said. "This is why opening that door and standing our ground was worth it." She read the comment, then wrapped her arms around me. "We did good," she said simply. That night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I thought about Karen Davidson and her fake HOA scheme. In trying to exploit the worst aspects of homeowners associations, the rigid rules, the arbitrary enforcement, the financial penalties, she had inadvertently highlighted the best alternative. A community where neighbors looked out for each other voluntarily, where connections were based on mutual respect rather than coercion. The fake HOA had failed not just because it was illegal, but because it ran counter to the very spirit of our neighborhood. Karen had missed the fundamental truth that real community safety and value come not from external enforcement, but from shared commitment to each other's well-being. As I finally fell asleep, I felt grateful not for the ordeal we'd been through, but for what it had revealed about our community and ourselves. Sometimes it takes a counterfeit to make you appreciate the genuine article. And in Oakridge Estates, we had found the real thing. A neighborhood where homes weren't just properties to be regulated, but places where people lived, connected, and looked out for one another. In the end, that was worth far more than any homeowners association, real or fake, could ever provide.